opportunity to talk about the impact of money in campaigns just the day before our own election locally. Fortunately, I don't know of any attempt to take over Amherst at this point. It looks like 240 people are going to be running for town meeting. We're going to have a couple of votes for Board of Trustees as well as a school committee. But we're going to look at something that's even bigger than that, that does affect the ultimate outcome of the right we have as citizens to be empowered to control the events of our time. And I'm talking about the Citizens United campaign that's about to embark. And with me are some people that are well known to the community. First of all, I want to say, Alice, it's good as a colleague to have you back. Alice is an outstanding example of working for democracy for many years in this community, and her impact has been noticeable and inevitable in the right direction. And John Bonifaz. John is the co-chair and founder of Free Speech for People. It's a movement to deal exactly with that. Explain that title, and then we'll get into the substance of this.
Free Speech for People is a national campaign launched on the day of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United v. FEC to press for a 28th Amendment to the Constitution to restore democracy to the people and make clear that corporations are not people with constitutional rights.
And Alice, give us an example of why it's important that we deal with this issue.
Well, this issue affects everybody, and I would say, you're referring to the town meeting warrant article that I have calling to reverse that decision, and primarily that our voice needs to be heard because it's such an important issue, and I can go into that more as we go on.
Yeah, and we will go into it, but we need to look at the ramifications already that are evident. John, would you speak to that?
Sure. Well, first, just to make sure everybody's on the same page here, the United States Supreme Court ruled in January of 2010, 2 years ago, that corporations have an unlimited right under the First Amendment to spend their corporate treasury dollars in our elections at the federal, state, and local level. And what that has done is unleashed a torrent of corporate money into our campaigns. This was a decision that swept away a century of precedent that had barred corporate money in our elections. And now it is very much an unlimited situation for corporations. They can come in at any level to sponsor campaigns, independent expenditures that will be designed to influence election outcomes. And in 2010, in November, what we saw is hundreds of millions of corporate dollars, many of them secret corporate dollars, being spent in that November election to influence the outcome of the House and Senate races that were at stake. And now in this presidential election cycle, we're even seeing more of it. We've seen it at the Republican primary level, where all these super PACs have emerged with both corporate dollars and unlimited individual money coming into the process. And we will see it even more going into the general election. It is a direct threat to the integrity of our elections and to our democracy, and it's why we need an amendment to overturn the ruling and overturn this idea of corporations being treated as people under the Constitution.
And we've already seen the impact of that during the Republican primary, where money made the difference.
We have. I mean, the super PACs that have emerged, some people say, well, that wasn't directly as a result of Citizens United. It was, in fact, a direct result coming out of Citizens United.
That couldn't happen without Citizens United.
Citizens United,
there are rules, aren't there? There's still rules.
There are rules, but Citizens United opened the door to a separate ruling that then unleashed unlimited individual money into the process. So you have these billionaires and you have these large corporations that are effectively now able to drown out ordinary citizen voices and to undermine the promise of American democracy of, for, and by the people. This is a crisis in American democracy today, and one in which we must use Article 5 powers under the Constitution to amend the Constitution to make clear that we the people rule, not we the corporations.
So what do you want to do about it locally, Alice? Tell us.
We have an article on the warrant for Amherst town meeting, which the town meeting starts April 30th, I think, but this will come up probably in the middle of May. And I will read from it. There are several whereas statements, and I won't read all of them, but the first two are particularly important. Whereas the First Amendment to the United States Constitution was designed to protect the free speech rights of people, not corporations. Whereas corporations are not people, but instead are entities created by the law of states and nations. And it goes on with other whereas, meaning why we are bringing this. And then, now be it resolved that the town of Amherst, Massachusetts, hereby calls upon the United States Congress to pass and send to the states for ratification a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission, and to restore constitutional rights and fair elections to the people. And then there are two more paragraphs having to do with calling on the Massachusetts legislature to urge Congress to pass this, and then having our town clerk notify these elected officials of our action. So we are calling on Congress to pass the constitutional amendment and send it to the states. And what we're not doing is we're not asking for specific wording. There are at least a dozen, maybe more, I don't know how many, proposals in Congress, one of them by Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern. And just a few days ago, he told a couple of us who were getting signatures with him that the sponsors of those various proposals plan to get together so that they can all get behind one specific amendment. That's a question, of course, which amendment. But the town meeting is not being asked to make any decision about what kind of amendment, just that we want an amendment. And I'll go further and say the reason we are coming to town meeting is, rather than working individually, is because our voice is much stronger as a town, that it can have more of an effect. And I'll grab the little bit of time here too to say that in the mail today I received from Public Citizen a petition that I could send my name in on a petition to Senator Kerry and Senator Brown. But one person's name doesn't mean nearly as much as a town. And if the town can push the state, if the state passes a resolution, that has even greater effect. So that's part of why we're, or the primary reason why we are asking the town meeting as a whole to approve this, because the voice of the community is much greater than an individual.
You know, it's interesting, tomorrow, we will not have aired by then, but tomorrow the town election takes place, and we're going to elect 240 community members to town meeting. It's going to be interesting to find out how the new members in the town meeting are going to feel about this. But what's great about it is that we're having this program, we're creating an opportunity to find out what it's all about. I'm going to extend an invitation to any group that's opposed to doing anything, so that we'll have an opportunity to fully disclose and air our concerns about this and see if we can find a common meeting ground. And what's interesting is that we're not talking about a specific amendment on how to do it, but the concept that all of us are, or many of us are asking, how can it be that we have the impact on our elections which undermine the right of individual citizens to a voice? It's been kind of taken away from us.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
And this whole campaign, Isaac, around these resolutions is really a key vehicle for building this broader movement. We've been engaged at Free Speech for People since launching this campaign on the day of the Citizens United ruling in getting these kinds of resolutions off the ground. In fact, New Mexico just became the second state in the union to call on Congress to pass and send to the states for ratification this kind of constitutional amendment. They passed a resolution that a number of other groups on the ground in New Mexico. And as Alice has referenced here, there's an effort in the state legislature here in Massachusetts to have Massachusetts, be the next state in line. Senator Eldridge out of Acton, Representative Atkins out of Concord have both introduced this similar kind of resolution in the state legislature. Martha Coakley has become the first sitting Attorney General in the United States, Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley, to support this kind of resolution and call for a constitutional amendment. So we're hopeful that if Amherst, as the dozen or so other towns have already done in Massachusetts, passes this resolution, and other towns will be voting on it in this spring town meeting cycle as well, that it will put further pressure on the state, and the state will then join the ranks of New Mexico and Hawaii in leading the nation to reclaim our democracy.
Now, this is happening in many towns and states
already.
Yeah.
It is.
And people are getting together around a common denominator, and that's to question the right of, question the decision. There's no question about the right of the Supreme Court, but to question the decision that makes a corporation the equal to people who will go out and vote. Tell me more about what's going on at the national level.
Well, we've seen a number of these states now introduce this kind of resolution. So in Vermont, there's a pending resolution there. 63 towns on town meeting day in March just passed similar kinds of resolutions that Alice has cited here. We've seen the same kind of resolutions introduced in New York State and California, there where the Assembly just passed. It's now pending in the California Senate. So there's a lot of activity happening at the grassroots level, and of course any constitutional amendment that comes out of Congress has to go to the states for ratification. So we think it's important that we build that kind of movement from the states. But at the same time that's happening, Isaac, there's also an opportunity now to push the United States Supreme Court to revisit this decision out of a case coming from Montana, where the Montana Supreme Court upheld the state's century-old law banning corporate money in elections, an extraordinary ruling just before the end of the last year. And now the U.S. Supreme Court is faced with this question whether they take this case on its merits or whether they just quickly reverse what the state Supreme Court has done. And we're going to see in a very short period of time which road they take. And if they decide to quickly reverse, it's only going to fuel further the argument of why they need to be overturned with a constitutional amendment.
Alice, coming back to town meeting, can you give us one or two examples, if you can, I'll help you, of how taking a position on a national or an international issue has had a real impact? Because the concern historically at town meeting is we should be dealing with tax issues, we should be dealing with streets, we should be dealing with zoning. We're not in a position to deal with these big issues. And aside from saying, I think the right of a citizen to have an equal opportunity at the polling place is a big issue that we cannot relegate to somebody else. And my argument at town meeting would be, I'm for giving us the same opportunity to have representative government as we're now giving corporations.
Oh, certainly, I think so. It's hard for me to. I mean, there have been so many citizens' petitions over the years that it's hard for me to think exactly what has been the impact. But it certainly has been very important that we all are able to make our voices heard as a community, and on health care, on questions of the immigration policies. Well, actually, when I think about it, there was one about the Guantanamo a couple of years ago, I guess, where we said that we would take a couple of men if they were released from Guantanamo, and I'm sure that had an effect on the national discussion, as other towns did that. Sometimes we're voices crying in the wilderness. I mean, I think we have called for single-payer health care several times, and we still don't have it, but you never know when that might happen. And a long time ago, Nancy Foster, who unfortunately is no longer with us, worked very hard to prevent what were called Gwen towers from being, this was probably even before you moved to Amherst, being erected in Amherst. They had to do with the relay. It was when we were so nervous about being attacked by other countries, and these were towers that would relay information about the possibility of I don't know whether it was nuclear attack or what it was.
We didn't get beyond that. Fortunately, time changed the agenda.
Yes, it did.
But Mandela is another example. Obviously, it wasn't just our voice. We were just one in millions of voices throughout the world, and it took a long, long time. And which brings me back to this issue of that we're talking about today, that this is not a quick fix that we're into. We're talking about, and this is the exciting part, because I think young people in particular have to learn that we need to be historical in terms of how change takes place and not hysterical. This is not a hysterical movement. Concern is not hysteria. We have to put it on the table and mandate as Americans that we determine the outcome of this issue. And if it takes 10 years to do it, so be it. John, you want to speak to that?
I couldn't agree more, Isaac. This is definitely something that requires a long-term vision, though it is also true that the amendment process has included amendments that have passed even less than 2 years. We lowered the age from 21 to 18 for voting in less than 2 years, albeit at the height of the Vietnam War. But the fact is that we don't know, when we're going to get this amendment enacted, but we need to start the process, and we need to do it if we're going to preserve our democracy. Let me just say one other thing related to how this affects us here in Amherst. The fact is that this question of whether or not we're going to have corporations now controlling our democracy affects us at every level. It's not just about politics in Washington or even in the state capitals. It's about whether or not we as people govern, or whether it's now artificial creatures of the state that we create, corporate entities, that are governing over us. And when we look at the Wall Street scandal and the BP oil catastrophe and the 29 coal miners who died in West Virginia 2 years ago this week, the fact is that all of those examples are examples of corporate power subverting our democracy and our government. And we need to reclaim our democracy, and we need to do it at every level.
Alice, you want to add to that?
Yes, actually, I've been working on the presentation for town meeting, and it obviously is going to be changed, but I say something about what corporations are throwing millions of dollars to support municipalities, schools, and public transportation.
Exactly.
None. I mean, all this money is going for other things that are taking money away from our local concerns. And I also find it exciting to be part of a national movement, and rather than sitting back and saying this is happening to us, aren't we unhappy about it? I hope somebody else does the right thing. For us to say we want to take, well, not control, but we want to have a voice. We want to make a difference. We want to have a say in what our federal government does.
Right.
And
it's
exciting, as you say, historical.
Alice, that we don't have to look very far and wide to find examples of that all over the world. And also our young people, in not only in our town, but in towns throughout America, are speaking out. I think the Occupy Wall Street is an example of what I'm talking about. It's not just a fad. They may not have congregated around one particular issue, but in Springfield it could be foreclosures. In Amherst it could be this issue that we're talking about. Whatever. The point is, people are aroused because we've reached a point where the 99% are beginning to comprehend that the 1% continue to fleece the rest of the population. And this undermines education. It undermines the quest for peace. It undermines the quest for health care for people. All the issues that are, and jobs,
Yes.
that's not least. Jobs are, the lack of jobs are
Absolutely.
undermining the whole concept of what is enjoying the fruits of our democracy. So that I'm excited too, but we also got to play. When I say it could take 10 years, I hope it doesn't take 10 years.
Right,
Right.
right.
But I'm saying, what I'm putting out is, this is not an overnight pill.
You're right.
Right,
It is
yeah.
not. And let me say one
We're
other
not
thing.
going to be pregnant for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the other thing about this is, you know, we often get the question at Free Speech for People on this campaign and other campaigns that are engaged in this, like Public Citizen and other groups. You know, well, we don't really amend the Constitution anymore. That's been done. That's too difficult. And we have to remind ourselves we've done this 27 times before in our nation's history, once every decade in the last century since 1913, except the 1940s.
Can you give some
and
examples of that?
Yeah,
John?
we've amended the Constitution to guarantee women the right to vote, the 19th Amendment. We've expanded the democracy in the process, banning poll taxes in elections in the 24th Amendment. Obviously, the post-Civil War amendments, the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equal protection of the law, the 15th Amendment barring discrimination in voting based on race, all were important amendments to expand our democracy, to defend our democracy. We've amended the Constitution to provide for the ability of a progressive income tax. We have engaged in doing this, engaging in this process every time we face the need to expand our democracy and to defend it. And this is one of those moments in our history where the United States Supreme Court has essentially said that we don't have the power to control these artificial creatures of the state, that they will govern over us. And 7 of those 27 times, Isaac, we have overturned a U.S. Supreme Court ruling. And this is one of those moments where we have to do that.
Can we give folks out there, in case they have to go and they can't watch the rest of this program, an idea of how they can get in touch locally as well as nationally? Because we're not going anywhere.
Yes.
Well, we are going somewhere, but it's going to take a lot. It means building a movement.
Right.
There may be people out there who are ready to say, I'd like at least some more information, or
Right.
is there a local meeting where I can attend?
Well,
Alice,
go
why
ahead
don't
on
we
the local
start?
side.
I don't really think there is, I mean, other than contacting me for what I know about, I think it's better to go through one of these. I mean, there's so many
Well,
organizations.
certainly to show up at town meeting,
Town meeting,
even if you're
yes.
not a elected member of town meeting, as a resident, to be
Yeah.
part of the conversation.
And
But
as I
also,
said, we don't know when it will come up at town meeting, but
Right.
we may be able to designate or ask for a particular date in advance.
Right.
But in May.
but we invite people all across the state and around the country to join this campaign at freespeechforpeople.org to sign up, sign our resolution, to get the regular updates. We have a campaign with Ben and Jerry's ice cream called getthedoughOut.org, where we're now going to go around to campuses throughout this month of April in engaging with young people on the campuses around this question. You can find out more about that at freespeechforpeople.org. There's a lot of ways for people to get involved, and we'd welcome people joining us.
Well, you can give us an email address. It doesn't have to be now, but we can add it
can
to the
go on.
program.
But I do want to give credit to a few other people.
Yes.
Because I'm not bringing this to town meeting by myself.
I understand
There are
that.
3 of us who are sticking our necks out. And the
And
other
they
2 are Adrienne Terizzi and Cynthia Brubaker. And we're part of a group that's been working on
Yes.
this. So it's not coming out from just, you know, we're not just individuals who decided this would be a good thing to
Yes.
do. We're working together with other people.
It takes a movement.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a breather for a second. And John, are there other things that you want to bring to our attention?
Well, I think the other thing that just to highlight here is that this ruling of Citizens United v. FEC was actually the most extreme extension of a corporate rights doctrine that has been eroding our First Amendment, our Constitution, for some 30 years. So it's not like, you know, the Supreme Court just made a mistake here. They have been engaged for some 30 years in assigning corporations with the rights of people under the First Amendment that the framers never intended. James Madison spoke of corporations as a necessary evil subject to proper limitations and guards. Thomas Jefferson said he hoped to, quote, crush in its birth the aristocracy of moneyed corporations. And for 2 centuries, the federal courts, the United States Supreme Court, followed the framers' mandate. Now, it's also true that in 1886 there was a ruling in a case known as Santa Clara County v. Southern Pacific Railroad, where in the head notes of that case, not in the actual ruling itself, the head notes stated that the court had decided corporations are people with respect to the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. And that error got repeated in a number of cases leading up to the New Deal era. But then there was this period in which this whole doctrine was dormant, and Lewis Powell, a private attorney working for the Chamber of Commerce, wrote this infamous memorandum in 1971 in which he articulated how corporate America could fight back against these public interest laws that were getting enacted to protect the environment, to protect health care, consumer rights, and civil rights. And he became Justice Lewis Powell, nominated by then-President Nixon and appointed to the court, and he became an architect of this doctrine. And we are now seeing the most extreme extension of that doctrine in Citizens United.
John, have we seen any corporations going to jail since they're considered people now?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. You know,
I know individuals, but they're not corporations.
Well, this is exactly right. You know,
Yeah.
and Justice Kennedy in the Citizens United ruling, he somehow equated corporations with associations of people, but they're very different. You know, a voluntary association of people is just that. It's nothing more. When you go to the state to seek a charter to become a corporation, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, you have state-based advantages that you and we don't have. Limited liability, perpetual life, the ability to aggregate wealth and distribute wealth on the for-profit side. On the nonprofit side, tax-deductible contributions, so forth. And those artificial creatures of the state are not people. They are governed by us, and we are the ones who rule over them, not the other way around.
So how do we become corporate citizens? Is there a paper we have to fill out?
There's no particular document that defines that. No.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, it is a good deal.
You can steal and get away with it.
And they do. But not all, I think we have to be careful, not all corporations are bad.
Absolutely.
But we're talking about the big
we
ones.
know that.
Yeah.
But
We've actually got 1,000 business leaders signed on to this campaign, including Ben and Jerry, and you know, and that is, I think, key. This is not an anti-corporate campaign, but it is saying that corporations have a place in the economic sphere, but they don't belong in our politics. They're not political actors.
Alice, coming back locally, aside from the fact that town meeting is going to meet at the end of April, and that this will be considered sometime in May, will this group of 3 that you talked about, will there be an opportunity for, at each precinct level, to have a discussion as we do for other warrants and
well, there's a warrant review program April 10th, I believe, in the evening, put on by the League of Women Voters, and that's an opportunity for town meeting members, all town meeting members, especially new ones, but anyone, to come and learn something about each article.
Will you be doing
and
that?
I'll be doing a presentation, but it has to be, I can't advocate for it, which means I have to take out most of what I would say. You know, I mean, I can, in other words.
How can you examine without advocating?
Well, no,
You
I mean, it's
objectively
really, it has
just
to be
report it?
objectively telling the town meeting members what it is they'll be voting on.
Can
And,
citizens ask questions that may
think
not
so.
follow the same rules?
I'm not clear, but the whole point is to be able to, for the town meeting members to understand what the article is about and, you know, just the bare facts, I think.
And where will
But,
that meeting take place?
actually, I'm not sure. It's put on by the League of Women Voters, and it'll be publicized, but I don't know, you know, off the top of my head. I better not say, because I wouldn't want to guess and be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, but that is an opportunity for people to learn more about the article, and we certainly will have handouts. And I think the article itself, the petition, you know, it has these 5 or 6 whereas clauses which tell why we need to pass this, as I said, because, you know, corporations are not people and other things of that sort that are in the whereas. So if the town meeting members read the entire article, I think they'll get a good idea of what's there. But I'll also be going to the select board. I forget now what night that is. Yeah, I don't have my calendar in front of me. It's
But
either
at
the
a
day
future
before or
select board
after
meeting.
In fact, it may be that I'm going to the select board on a Monday night, and the warrant review is the following night, and which dates they are, I'm not sure. But the select board will have an opportunity to decide, and there I will be advocating for it certainly, and they will have an opportunity to decide whether they would like to take a position on it. And I'm very hopeful that they would, because basically, practically anybody that I talk to says, oh yes, I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, and we actually, early on in this campaign, we commissioned a public opinion study. It was Peter Hart, a pollster with Wall Street Journal and NBC News, and he found across the board, across the political spectrum, support for this idea of a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United ruling and to make clear that corporations are not people with constitutional rights. 68% of Republicans, according to that study, support that idea. 82% of independents, 87% of Democrats. So this is the thing, Isaac, this is one of those moments where we can unite around a common vision. We may have our differences as to what role government should play in healthcare and the economy or so forth, but we can agree that it's government of, for, and by the people. And that's the common vision that I think that we have an opportunity to seize here. The Supreme Court is way out of step with the American people on this question.
As you described the kinds of people that are speaking out, and I really understand that there are approximately 80% of the American people, in terms of whatever polls have been taken.
Yes.
Right.
And it's understandable why. All you had to do is be at some of the meetings, not meetings, the programs, television programs.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I think the corporate press had a problem with this. It changed the rules entirely.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's probably the reason why we had this extended. Not that I'm opposed to long debates on who the candidates ought to be, but I think the money factor played such a significant role. A's on top today, tomorrow he's on the bottom, C comes in, here comes D. It's like a horse race. But the ramifications are money, 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 money.
Right.
And I think a lot of people were turned off by that.
And the other thing that's a ramification that we haven't discussed yet is the level at which debate is stifled. Issues are not put on the table because of the threat that candidate or, frankly, that elected official is going to face from corporate or moneyed interests. So it's not only the direct impact on election outcomes, it's the direct impact on our debate, on public policy. You now know, if you're an elected official, whether you're at the federal, state, or local level, that if you dare to promote a public interest that's at odds with where the corporate interest is, that you could subject yourself to being the target of a corporate-sponsored campaign, unleashing general treasury dollars on your own reelection. And that, I think, is going to scare off a lot of people from standing up to the public interest. Now, I think, there's a good reason to say, well, you need to stand up anyway, but the fact is it's going to impact our debate, already has, and that, I think, is just as much of a threat to our democracy as the impact of actual election outcomes.
Well, maybe that's going to open the door to raising the question once again, whatever happened to equal time? After all, it's not corporate ownership of the airwaves.
That's right.
It's still public ownership. They are licensed.
Yes.
It may not take as long as getting an amendment to the Constitution, but it certainly opens up the issue of, if there's going to be no controls of money, then maybe we need to create a law that says anybody who's been demeaned, it's going to open up a whole wave of protests about, well, how can you do that, everybody? You're preventing freedom of speech if you give anybody the opportunity. But I would like to have the same right as the people with the money to fight back. And it seems that that's another area that we need to pay some attention to.
That brings up something that we haven't mentioned, is that we've been talking about the constitutional amendment, but there are lots of things that need to be changed by legislation. So the constitutional amendment is really just one part of it, but it's the part that it doesn't have to go first, but it's a fundamental
I think it provides the engine for all these other reforms. So Alice, and I have been long-standing proponents of public funding of elections.
Yeah.
We believe in that firmly. Public disclosure of these contributions, these expenditures should be made. Right now, corporations, because of the way the law was before Citizens United, where they were outright banned from making these kinds of expenditures, there's no disclosure requirements on the books. So there's a lot of secret corporate expenditures that are happening. There needs to be disclosure. There needs to be shareholder accountability, where shareholders get engaged in deciding whether or not corporate management is going to be able to expend corporate general treasury dollars. A lot of these legislative reforms are very much needed, but the overarching campaign of a constitutional amendment provides that engine for those reforms. We need to be bold and we need to be broad in our vision on this question to reclaim our democracy, and the amendment provides that opportunity. The ERA was the last big progressive amendment fight we've had in this country, and while it did not get enacted, I think it still should be enacted, and maybe it will come back to the states again. But the fact is that it changed the debate. It put gender equality on the table. So a lot of other things got pushed through, even though the amendment didn't get enacted. Now, I think we're going to enact this amendment. I think we're going to ultimately prevail. But in the process, we're also going to help push through a lot of other reforms, and that's the value of the amendment process as well.
And we're going to talk about the impact the Supreme Court is having on how money is undermining the Constitution and our democracy. Alice Swift, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to John.
Well, what I have on my mind right now is how money, if we have money from these corporations, in states where they elect judges, then the judges will be beholden to the corporations that are funding their campaigns. And what kind of fair judicial system is that? So I just want to bring that point out. We don't elect judges in Massachusetts, but there certainly are other states that do.
And
So,
of course, we elect people to office, which
yes.
is what happened during this Republican primary. Is a perfect example of who gets to be the candidates. John, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, John is a constitutional lawyer, so he speaks with some understanding of the issues, and we're very appreciative that you took the time.
Well, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be. This is a broad movement of people from all walks of life engaged in trying to reclaim our democracy. On the question of, the candidates and the impact, we really are seeing once again here in 2012, as we saw in 2010, the impact of unlimited corporate money in our elections. And a lot of it is going to come from sources that we will not be able to identify, because the way the law is today, as of Citizens United, as of that ruling, there's no requirement whatsoever to disclose on the part of a corporation.
So if a multinational gets involved, then we have no way of knowing.
We have no way of knowing, including foreign companies, foreign corporations, either state-owned or privately owned abroad, coming into our election cycle. There'd be no way of knowing if they wanted to engage in secret corporate expenditures. Now, some, to be fair, are making it clear they're engaged because they want the candidates to know they're engaged. So Alpha Natural Resources, as an example, is the new owner of Massey Energy Coal Company. Alpha is the second largest coal company in the country, and they are big backers of Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. They want Mitt Romney to know that. They've given a lot of money to the Restore America super PAC that's supporting Mitt Romney. You then have people like Sheldon Adelson, who's a big backer of Newt Gingrich. He's given, over $10 million, he and his wife now, to the super PAC supporting Newt Gingrich. So you have this fight going on between the billionaires and the corporations, and where are the rest of us? It's drowning out ordinary citizen voices. This is not what democracy is about. It's not what the right to vote is about, and it's a complete threat that is coming to our democracy, and it must be overturned with a constitutional amendment.
And what it does is it creates a situation where all parties are getting involved with this, what I call money under the table that's not publicized. So no party can stand up and say, we're not using money coming from wherever
Right.
I mean, I think candidates can say we're raising our own money, but as long as we have this, in effect, this decision by the Supreme Court in effect, anybody can say, I'm going to throw 10 million, 20 million, 30 million,
Right.
50 million, and sway the campaign, or buy a region, or buy candidates. And, you know, it's bad enough now. There's enough corruption without adding to the corruption level.
Absolutely. Now, you asked prior to the break, you know, what could Congress do short of an amendment? And there are things, as we discussed, that Congress could do to help move us along in dealing with this situation. Public funding of elections, disclosure, requiring disclosure of these corporate entities, shareholder accountability. These are all pending bills in Congress. But ultimately, I think that the way those kinds of reforms are going to get passed is because of a broad grassroots movement. You know, this is not going to happen because people in power think it's a good idea. It's going to happen because we, the people at the grassroots level, move this forward. That's what happened with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Women did not get the right to vote in this country because men in power thought it was a good idea. They organized, they fought, and they died for the right to vote under the 19th Amendment. And we've seen that time and time again in our history when we think of democracy movements, civil rights movement, the labor rights that were gained in the 1930s. All these kinds of movements have ultimately been about people at the grassroots level rising up and standing up for our democracy. And we need a new democracy movement today, and that's what this amendment campaign is really trying to invigorate and crystallize.
Well, here we are again. So the campaign is there. There are thousands of people all over America engaged in all kinds of local activities. Let's touch on the Occupy Wall Street movement. You indicated during the break that there's already discussion with
yes.
some of the...
Do you want to talk about Occupy Amherst?
That's as grassroots
Absolutely.
as you're going to get.
Yeah.
I have to admit I haven't done much with Occupy Amherst, but I did get minutes today from that group referring to the work that they're, you know, how they're coordinating with this whole question of Citizens United. That's a very big concern of theirs.
Yeah, there's no question that the Occupy movement, both in Amherst and all over the country, has helped to elevate this conversation to a much higher level. And what we've seen are statements that have been passed at general assemblies and different Occupy gatherings around the country supporting this kind of an amendment, making clear corporations are not people with constitutional rights. I happened to speak in December before a very large crowd that Occupy Berkshires organized, different Occupy groups in Pittsfield, Great Barrington, North Adams. There's a lot of energy coming out of that movement that is also being engaged and used for this effort, and I think it's very important. But I will say this also. I mean, as much as I personally may disagree with elements of the Tea Party and what they stand for, there are people engaged from the Tea Party movement who believe, from a libertarian standpoint, that government should not be captured by these artificial creatures of the state corporations. And we have to be willing, as a movement, to embrace people of all ideologies around this common vision of government of, for, and by the people. And I may disagree with some libertarians around what government should do around questions of people's basic social needs, but I will agree with anyone who stands for the proposition that it's government of, for, and by the people, and that artificial creatures of the state are governed by us, we the people, not the other way around.
Well, it's interesting that you raised I can recall, the issue of the Tea Party movement, because I have experienced personally during the campaign, the congressional campaign, when I had an opportunity to interview the candidate opposing John Oliver last time. And we worked hard together to try to find some commonality. We finally did on one or two issues. But I totally agree. We don't own the future of the United States. It's owned by all of us.
Right.
And there should be no line drawn in the sand.
Right.
And I'm sure that's going to happen because, that's one of the things that's interesting about the Occupy Wall Street, because They come from right field, left field, center field.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
really baseball players all
Yeah.
over the mound.
Right.
And it's good to see that because even people who have a particular point of view are learning that, you know, you got to kind of step back and say, yeah, I believe something, but I have to reach out and hope they'll reach out to me. All we want is respect and courtesy in as we evolve into a common ground.
Yes.
And I can't think of a more exciting place to be than to defend the right of Americans, to protect their right to vote and to enlarge in that right, and to go after the local issues like states where they're trying to mandate certain kinds of rules which make it impossible for immigrants or minorities, where they're actually looking at minority groups and saying we got to find a way to keep them from voting. And this is all part of the freedom movement, the free speech movement.
Absolutely. And we're also seeing, I will say, on the other side, you know, we're seeing now voices at the national level among Republicans coming forward in support of this. So Walter Jones, he's a Republican congressman from North Carolina. He's now co-sponsored Congressman Jim McGovern's amendment bill, which is our People's Rights Amendment, which you can read about at peoplesrightsamendment.org, which is part of our site, Free Speech for People. And you can read about the amendment, but also see that it's one of two bipartisan amendment bills in Congress.
To deal specifically with the amendment to the Constitution.
That's right, and that's important. David Stockman, former budget director under President Reagan, he's come out calling for a constitutional amendment. John McCain has yet to say he's for an amendment, but he's been very clear that he thinks the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United was wrong. He's called it naive. He said the justices didn't have a clue. You know, and it was a 5-4 ruling. It's important to remember there were 4 justices who dissented, led by Justice Stevens, who's no longer on the court. But you know, the fact is this was a decision sharply divided on the court, and they have an opportunity through that Montana case I mentioned to get it right and to overturn that ruling. But the likelihood is that they're not going to do that, and we're going to need to plow forward further with this amendment movement.
Alice, one final note on town meeting, just to bring people back to how people can participate and get in touch with their local town meeting members.
Yes, I would encourage people to talk after the election tomorrow, after they know who their elected town meeting members are, to contact their town meeting members and say, yes, I care about this issue and you should represent me and vote in favor of the article, because it is an issue, as we said, that affects everyone, and it's appropriate for our town meeting to vote on it. And so very rarely does anybody ever contact their town meeting members. But if town meeting members say, I wasn't elected to vote on issues like this, then it's important for the voters to say, yes, I want you to vote for it. And so just, you know, talk to your elected representatives and tell them how you feel. Yeah.
Well, this has been fun. John.
Isaac, great to be with you.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks for having
Alice,
us.
it's a pleasure. This is Conversations, and we're going to wind up on this constitutional amendment. But we will be back because I have a hunch there are a lot of voices out there. And by the way, I want to remind people, any other perspectives or points of view are welcome at any time. Just get in touch with me. I'll be very happy to arrange an opportunity to expand the discussion. So good night, and keep freedom alive, and vote tomorrow, even though you will have voted by the time you got this message. But then you'll vote the next time.
September primary.
September primary, right. Okay, John, goodbye.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you.
And Alice.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you to the student volunteers here at ACTV and staff. As usual, you do a wonderful job. Good night, good luck, see you next week.